Whoa, making a video. Yeah, response video to 2B series is, I don't know, apparently she's going to do 30 questions on the subject of consciousness over 30 days or something. So anyway, I don't much like the style of it all. You know, text videos with music is really irritating. But anyway, and then there was a link to a website with a bunch of, well, I'll show it to you. I don't think it's too constructive in terms of having a conversation about consciousness or what it is or what it's doing or how it works or any of that. So this is the website. So they give you a choice of all these little different brains to choose from, and they all have little funky images. Isn't it all cute and totally unreadable little tiny text, but a field that exists in its own parallel realm of existence outside of reality, so can't be seen. Anyway, it's not very good. These are, they're just not very useful. A couple of the definitions are so simple, like a functional device for survival. Yeah, okay. You know, some of them are so simple that, yeah, you could agree with those. So let's say 3 are accurate, 5 might be half true, and 2 or 3 are just complete nonsense. So anyway, don't see much use in using that as a template for what's going on. You know, there's no other context, in my opinion, than just to understand pretty much the why before you go to the how, right? The why are we conscious thing is kind of the question. You answer that one, and you don't even need to know the how, really, but you might as well go there. But the why is behavior, obviously. You know, the brain is a behavior tool. The value of the tool is its capacity to create stuff that we do. You know, it makes us move in certain ways and interact in the environment in certain ways, and that is conducive to perpetuating not just our code, but any like code. Okay, so we're sort of back to the selfish gene and the idea that there's certain genes and that those genes are interested in getting perpetuated, and that's all that we're really doing, is perpetuating the existence of pieces of genetic code, and the ones that win get into the future, so to speak. And that's what we're doing. And that's why it exists, is because it's conducive to the replication of code I'm likely to have. Anyway, alright, so the second thing might be the balance advantages of having against dangers of taking. So that might be a good way to put it. That consciousness basically is a functional device. It allows us to there's probably, I say this another way in terms of risk and necessity, but the basic function in humans, in how it now exists, not in how it originated, does allow us to make these value judgments, so we can optimize performance in a very explicit and exquisite way, in terms of judging what's worth it. Yeah, which now becomes a very complex question. What's worth it? So they start off probably as a system of attraction and repulsion, you know, seek and avoid. Simple concepts, just kind of almost mechanical, almost material, almost like something a little bit of dust would do or something. The idea of, you know, just the basic sensible thing, like don't go into the fire kind of stuff. A very crude self-preservation mechanism in terms of creating a capacity to react to negative, you know, things destructive to your genetic code in one way, and react to things conducive to the extension of your genetic code in another way, and to have those two ways of reacting create an internal mechanism that is got the capacity to create something called a reward, you know, something created in terms of an incentive or a punishment. And so we're but it's a basic mechanism. So somewhere where exactly feelings start is hard to say, but it started somewhere 500 million years ago or so. Ouch was a possibility, and things started saying, I don't want to do ouch, I want to do ooh, ah. Relief was what things were after. So it's almost like the system is a system for creating attention and obliging us to wind ourselves down in some sort of way conducive to the perpetuation again of the genetic code. So relief is probably an interesting word to play with. So let's see, a system of value analysis. So this is where it gets a little more complicated. So once you create a system that establishes value, but establishes it in this crude way of attraction, repulsion, pain, pleasure. Now it can get more complicated in that it can store information from past experience. So now learning becomes part of the component of this conscious mechanism, and balancing previous experience against projected, imagined possibilities, and doing a more elaborate analysis, more complex analysis to establish, what you're able to glean out of the circumstance. And the circumstance has these two components: what's in the environment, what does the environment make possible, and the other component is internally. There's this whole incentive engine running, saying, what's my immediate necessity? Do I need food bad enough to risk getting killed to get it? And those kind of value exchanges are now possible. So that's the analysis that can take place once you establish this mechanism and establish this capacity to store previous experience. Alright, so the way I put this, and another way of phrasing it was balance risk against necessity, and that the byproduct of that was to create a model of the value game inside of us, an internal model of the genetic code's value game. So it has there's certain things that are valuable to the perpetuation of your genes. Those things became associated with a value mechanism acknowledged inside of this gray matter, and the funny byproduct, funny quote unquote, is that it created what I would consider to be actual value by trying to synthesize a representation of the genetic code's values. Your brain created in this conscious mechanism actual value, an actual sentient welfare state where an actual negative and an actual positive were now possible. Where when it was just a machine, just a piece of dust, it didn't matter. And now it does matter, because now the negative is a real negative, not just a negative to the interest of a perpetuating molecule. The molecule has no need to be perpetuated, and our consciousness, in a sense, has turned that need into something real by making it necessary to our comfort, and by creating such a thing as comfort. So anyway, I think that's somewhere in there is pretty good phraseology. Yeah, the welfare state of the feeling organism is now the relevant game, and that game only exists because a model was created to actualize the reproductive, mechanistic interests of code, genetic code on a molecule. Very, just hilarious. Ha ha ha. Yeah. All right. So the getting into the how. This all kind of migrates into a how question. For some of this conscious thing, I've used metaphors like a blackboard, like it's the brain using consciousness as a blackboard. It's the place it writes the stuff down so it can look at it and say, what does all this stuff mean? It's a place where it does its analysis. It's a sketch pad for your brains, the interaction of the different mechanisms of your brain to do the math. It's their calculator, however you want to say it. It's the abacus the brain's using. Mixing bowl, another analogy. That's just this bowl where it can throw all the senses data in, and it can throw in memories and all kinds of different things and have them interact and come out a color, come out with a dispositional solution based on what their value weight they have when they're thrown into the bowl. So everything that goes into the bowl, let's say, is tagged with a label: $5, $10, minus $5, minus $10. And your brain throws it in there and then adds it all up and says, okay, this is a minus circumstance, just go back to bed. Or this is a circumstance where there is possibility of profit, so get to it, steal the candy from the baby. Alright, the creation of a need machine. That's essentially what the brain's doing. It's creating a synthetic mechanism that makes the you can't give motives to DNA molecules, but makes the mechanism of gives reality in terms of a need, a real need, to the mechanism of replication, something like that. The survival interest, the needs, parallel. Yeah, so it's a creation of a need machine, and the needs parallel survival interest. That's essentially the mechanism. Yeah, for the most part. So anyway, that's what I wrote on this one. It's all there. Yeah. So anyway, but yeah, that's it. It's a survival tool. That's why it exists. It's merely because it helps pieces of genetic code survive. The fact that we have this illusion, a very intense state of qualitative state of being, when the consciousness is on, it's really on, and it's loud, and it seems quite meaningful from the person participating in it. And whether or not the brain needed to use that kind of a real mechanism to do its synthetic analysis, I don't think it needed to. I don't think it was the only option, but apparently we don't have anything to compare it to. We don't have any robots, any other robots, any other machines created by nature that have intellectual capacity, that have the capacity to do value math, that didn't come from our lineage. So this is another one of those only happened once things, with the there's many only happened once events in the history of life on Earth, and one of the only happened once events is probably neural control mechanisms, electrical control mechanisms. And so this was the model, and all the sentient animals on Earth probably have a common ancestor, and so this is the way it did it. And with this sense data being blended, some kind of feedback mechanism. I've talked about the how part more before. That I imagine it has something to do with those feedback mechanisms and creating infinite oscillations, infinite in the sense that they do have a termination by the physical dynamics, and somewhere in that termination is consciousness, something like that. But it's much like a camera focused into a TV screen and how it oscillates uncontrollably, or a speaker that feedbacks on itself, and it creates obnoxious things, and our brain is capable of creating obnoxious. So anyway, yeah, I think that's probably enough. So, until the next edition, I guess, right? But, could be interesting. We'll see where it goes. Yeah, I mean, I'm still going to argue that the real important thing here is just to understand how, the substance of our consciousness, the entirety of it is just a tool to perpetuate a molecule. And, it's a little bit, what's the word when you you don't have a real good reason for doing something? It's just not a very good reason to, it's just kind of deflating in terms of agenda and purpose and function. It does make it all seem quite horribly overdone. But anyway, till the next time.